Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Simply Bitcoin IRL. Today, we have a very special guest. I always enjoy my conversations with him, Lawrence Lepard. But before I bring him up on the show, I want to give a very special shout out to the amazing Bitcoin companies that make the show possible. If you haven't already done so, check out swanbitcoin.com. Best place to buy Bitcoin, built by Bitcoiners for Bitcoin, swanbitcoin.com. And of course, you don't want to miss Bitcoin 2023 in Miami Beach, Florida, May 18th to the 20th. It's the biggest Bitcoin conference in the world. You can use the promo code SIMPLY to get a big discount on your tickets. Anyways, that being said, Lawrence, welcome back to the show. Super happy to have you. Last time we had a conversation, I was at Bitcoin Magazine headquarters in Nashville, and it was one of my favorite podcasts that I've had in a long time. So I'm very happy that you're back.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for having me back, Nico. I always enjoy talking to you. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, so I always say this every show, but guys, I don't like to beat around the bush. So we're gonna jump straight into it, skip the small talk. Lawrence, where's the recession? Everyone thought there was gonna be a recession. Everyone was expecting that there was gonna be a recession. Where is it? Is it still coming? Did we
It's
do the
coming.
so-called soft landing?
Yeah, it's coming. I don't think we're going to have a soft landing. I disagree with that. It's basically, I mean, it depends on where you are in the stack, right? I think for middle income people, it's here, right? I mean, they're having a hard time paying the bills. You can see the credit card debt growth. A lot of people are surviving using their credit cards. Even the growth that we see, I mean, if you have a 3% GDP growth, but you've got 8% inflation, that really means that you ship 5% less goods. The three was the difference. It was the inflation rate, right? The gross number is changing, but the unit numbers are going down. So we're in a recession already. You're seeing it in housing for sure. You're starting to see it in cars, although ironically, I mean, there are a lot of cross currents here, right? I mean, there's a certain amount of fear, and I'm seeing this everywhere I go. Anyone who's looking at buying something, they're a little bit afraid of, in the past, you think, well, I'll wait and the prices will come down. And they're a little afraid of that. I mean, I just had a friend who just bought a house, and he was like, well, gosh, I don't know. Maybe things will come down, maybe they won't. We're kind of in an inflationary environment, and I think prices might continue to go up. So I probably ought to just buy it. So it's a tricky macro environment right now.
Yeah.
Very
And
difficult.
absolutely. Then how, specifically, like, how are people supposed to live? Like, I was looking at the official, statistics provided by the Fed, and housing prices over the last 2 or 3 years basically have doubled. Of course, if you own assets, you're very happy about that. But if you're like the majority of people, uh, you can't even afford a home, which is, insane.
No, that's right. I mean, and I think the only way people are able to make it is by taking on more debt. And that's fiat land, right? I mean, fiat land is built and premised upon putting debt on top of debt. And you know one of the biggest macro events of the last couple of quarters that I've seen is just the growth in credit card debt. It's gone straight up. And by the way, that's not cheap debt. If you're revolving it, if you're not paying it all off, you've got, I mean, the average credit card rate is I think crept up close to 20%, whereas it used to be substantially below that, more like 12, 15. So you get deep in debt, and you've got those recurring charges. I mean, it's a debt spiral, and I'm sure we're going to talk about that because the federal government's having the same experience, right?
So let's talk about it. what is
Yeah, right.
what is this debt spiral that you speak of, Lawrence?
Yeah, well, I hope you're good at pulling up charts. Maybe you can pull up the chart that shows the federal interest expense.
Absolutely.
U.S. federal government interest expense. I mean, I love this one, right? I mean, the you know the Fed in increasing interest rates, I think, doesn't necessarily understand the second order effect, which is it's going to increase the borrowing costs of the government as well, and as a result, the government. Yeah, that's a good one, right? So yeah, take a look at that, right? So this is U.S. federal government current expenditures interest payments. Look at what's going on as a result of the rise in rates, and we're running. I think on there it's showing kind of a 800 plus million rate headed to $1 trillion. I mean, look, the federal taxes are, in the 4 trillion range. I mean, we're getting to the point where the deficit is just going to blow out on interest alone, not to mention the fact that, cost of living adjustments for Social Security last year was 8.9% and probably be high again this year. So the government is in a debt doom loop, which is what happens when you get to the end of a sovereign debt crisis. That's it's messy, and we don't know if there's going to be deflation or inflation or both. I mean, there's been a little bit of deflation in some of the sound money assets, which has been a bummer the last 6 months to a year or two. But I think in general, it's safe to say that the trends are all running heavily inflationary and will continue to do so. I mean, I have to say, even I've been shocked by um, how inflation has persisted. I thought we'd at least start to see some year-over-year comps that would bring inflation down, and we really haven't seen much of that, right? And if it's if they raise rates to 5%, or they're just below that now, but if they get to 5 and that's not doing it, they're going to have to go higher. And those interest rates are already feeding into the cost of everything in the economy, and feeding into everybody's pocketbook. And so it's going to be a mess. It is going to be a mess. And I reject the soft landing. I reject the that we're not in a recession. We're definitely in a recession. I mean, ask the average person in this country how they feel about the finances, and they will say we are in a recession, no doubt. And the sad part is, I don't think the final shoe has really dropped. And in my opinion, the final shoe, or not the final shoe, but the next shoe, will be the stock market. The stock market, we were in the largest bubble since, well, the largest bubble ever, really. It measured in, certain terms like, asset values to GDP. And as a result of that, when it started to burst in December of 2021 until now, it's down roughly 20%. And that's not the way bubbles burst. When bubbles burst, they tend to go back to their base. And so, in my opinion, we've got a long way to go until stocks are fairly priced. I mean, we've got a 19 PE ratio in an economy that's slowing down, where the cost of everything is going up. So, and you can get 5% on a 1-year Treasury, whereas 3 years ago you got 0% on a 1-year Treasury. So, as a result of that, PE multiples are going to contract. Tavi Costa did a great chart. It's up on his thread on Twitter that you can see, that shows how PE multiples contract over time. And it's going to be a mess. And so, I think a lot of people in the country, they determine their spending and their lifestyle to some extent on how their savings are doing, how their portfolio is doing. And when you're down 20%, that's a ding. But if you've been in this game since '08, to buy the dip. And so my sense is they're all nervously looking at it and thinking, well, it'll come back. We'll go back to lower interest rates, inflation will get under control, and the stock market will go on to make new highs. And I vehemently believe that there's no possibility of that. There's absolutely no possibility of that rates are not going to go down, inflation is not going to go down, and the stock market is going to go down. And the next bite in the stock market, the next 20 to 30%, decline, and you're going to see people pull back very substantially. And then you're going to start to get the layoffs, and it's going to daisy chain all the way through. The car repossessions, the houses, everything. It's going to be a mess. It's going to be a complete mess.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think a lot of people were anticipating that, Lawrence, but for some reason it was a little bit more delayed. They were able to squeeze it out a little bit longer. And what you're making the case for that's a facade. That's not true. If you actually look at the fundamentals, if you actually look behind the hood, so to speak, it's not as sound as they would like you to believe, at least.
That's my belief. Yeah, that's my belief. That people are kind of faking it, and there's a lot of hopium going on, and the availability of credit and credit cards have allowed people to kind of get in trouble, and that's coming. That'll be a problem. So.
Yeah. And Bitcoin has been at least acting like or better said, the market has been treating Bitcoin as a risk on asset. A lot of people are saying that there's a decoupling coming, especially since the halving is next year. What's your thoughts on this? Is Bitcoin going to be affected by this potential recessionary environment that we're entering into?
No, I mean, well, yes and no. I mean, so if we have another March 20 like event, if we have a massive sell-off, if the stock market collapses, as an example, the correlation of everything kind of goes to one, and Bitcoin could dip back down to its low, or perhaps even below its low, and everything would, and that would be another global margin call, which I don't foresee that, but I also don't think it's a zero probability event. I mean, it could occur, and if it were to occur, um, Bitcoin would get hurt. But I think we're in the process now, and you're really starting to see it, in my opinion, in the charts of Bitcoin and gold and sound money assets separating from the rest of the market. Do you know what I mean? Since last September, when they really made a conscious effort to weaken the dollar, and they have made a conscious effort to weaken the dollar, and they basically, Bitcoin and gold have performed pretty well. Gold was as low as 1,600, went up to 1,900. Bitcoin was in the 16,000 area. It's up in the 23 area now. So, and I think that separation is going to continue and grow as time goes on.
Yeah. So about I would say it was about a week ago, but I think it's fresh. Is Augustin Carstens, who is the head of the Bank of International Settlements. He came out in an op-ed basically saying that Bitcoin has failed, or specifically, he said cryptocurrency to be specific. He says cryptocurrency has lost against fiat. What would your response be to that?
Yeah, my sense is he doesn't know what he's doing. I mean, he's just, he's talking his own book, and he's an idiot. That he doesn't know what Bitcoin is. I mean, look, he's right. Crypto is fatally flawed, and FTX demonstrated that. And as you and I both know, every crypto other than Bitcoin is a fraud. But beyond that, Bitcoin is going to work, and it's going to work extremely well. And he's just throwing sand in our face because his gravy train, his fiat gravy train, is threatened by the one form of truly sound money in the world. So.
Some fans of yours, Larry, and I promised that I would ask them. So the first question is, why is it under the gold standard that the middle class grew, but under fiat wealth disparity just continually widens with the middle class slowly becoming extinct? So why is that? Why is it under the gold standard that that the middle class was healthy compared to how the middle class is doing during the fiat standard now?
Yeah, the simple explanation is just the cantillionaire explanation, right? I mean, when you've got fiat money, people can, the people who get the money first benefit the most. They can lever themselves up. When you have gold, before Bitcoin was invented, gold was the only form, or the best form, of honest money. Silver was a close second. And as a result, people couldn't print and create money and benefit from the leverage that printed money gave them. And although there was fractional reserve banking, and we've moved from a truly sound money standard in the 1800s into a very unsound money standard on a go forward basis. It's really been a huge transition that's taken place, such that people, who were financially savvy, have figured out how to play the fiat game, and the fiat game puts money in their pockets and takes it out of everybody else's pocket. And so we've had all this incredible productivity and technology improvements, and yet all those gains have gone to the top, and they haven't been evenly distributed, and that's why we've got such enormous wealth disparity. And all of that is driven by fiat money. I mean, the people who can control the printing press and can play the game and are smart and know how to benefit from the inflation, they benefit at the expense of everybody else who pays the higher prices. I mean, and the classic example of this is, like, look at a guy like Ken Griffin, who runs, a big risk arb hedge fund in New York City. He blew himself up several times, and in each case, he got bailed out by the Fed, quietly through the back door. And that's how he's able to buy a $250 million penthouse. And meanwhile, and BlackRock, I mean, they borrow money at 0%. They buy houses, they rent them back to people they bought them from, at higher prices. And so the poor working guy has to pay higher rent for a house that he couldn't afford to buy because he couldn't borrow money at 0%. He was considered a credit risk, so he had to pay a much higher rate of interest. So he couldn't compete with BlackRock for that house. And as a result, his excess labor earnings go into BlackRock's pocket. He doesn't get to keep them. And this is why, there's just this incredible wealth disparity and unfairness in the economic system as it's currently constituted. I mean, it's criminal. It's literally criminal what's been done, and to the average people and to the working class of this country. And unfortunately, the saddest part of it all is, the people at the top have managed to get the working class of this country to divide up into Team Blue and Team Red and to throw stones at each other. And what they really should all become is part of Team Orange. And as you know, Team Orange is we're going to throw stones at the central bankers and get back to sound currency. And when we do that, the game will be fair again. But right now the game is just horribly unfair. I don't know. Did I answer that question?
You absolutely nailed it, and I think you
Yeah.
described it perfectly. And I completely agree. I think that they so geniusly do it. The orchestration is, if a Democrat is in office, the Republicans are like, all of your problems are because of the Democrats. Republicans in office, the Democrats are like, it's because of the Republican. And the entire time they continue to print money. The deficit spending, I think it's $1 trillion a year. Then they spend more money, $1 trillion a year than they collect in tax revenue. Everyone's
Right.
just being stolen blind unless you have your money in assets, right? Which is the minority of the country. So yeah, but how long could they keep this going? And then another thing, Lawrence, is they've used wars to get themselves out of this pickle in the past. And I'm looking over at what's going on in Ukraine, and I'm like, these guys are funding a war with a nuclear armed country. What the hell is going on here? Am
Yeah,
I seeing things, Lawrence?
$200 billion. $200 billion has gone into, we've shipped into the Ukraine. Yeah, no, it's part of the macro picture. I like to try and focus on the monetary piece of the picture, but what the government does in other respects informs, the monetary piece. And, wars are expensive. And so how do governments fund wars? They print money to fund them. One of the things I think it's important to point out too is, the Fed, I said this on another podcast, but I'm not sure everyone here listening to this would have heard that. It's interesting. Preston Pish had a really great chart that he put up on Noster that shows that actually global M2 is actually at a record high and is still growing. And even though the Fed balance sheet is slowly declining as a result of quantitative tightening, the growth in the central bank balance sheet in Japan and the central bank balance sheet in China has outweighed what the Fed has done in terms of cutting. So there's almost a little bit of daisy chaining going on. I see somebody say Ukraine needs help. What should we do? Just let Russia take over sovereign states? I don't want to go deep down that whole rabbit hole. But people who haven't taken the time to really understand what's happening in the Ukraine, I don't know where to start. First of all, somebody this morning compared the Ukraine to Vietnam. Well, as I recall, the people in the Ukraine who Russia is trying to help actually speak Russian. And the part of the Ukraine that Russia is trying to help actually was a part of Russia at one point. And those people were also being bombarded by Nazis in the western part of the Ukraine, who we supported in a coup in 2014. So, it's not as simple as the United States is always the good guy and all these bad countries and guys like Putin are always evil. I'm not saying Putin's a good guy. He's not. But, we have to take a look at, the splinter, the log in our eye before we go after the splinter in the other guys. Some of the behavior in the United States, the military and industrial complex has spent between $6 and $7 trillion in the past 20 years fighting wars and killing people. And, that benefits a certain class in the United States, but it doesn't necessarily benefit the world and world peace. And so, my view is if we had the ability to defund these wars, which if you had government on a sound money standard, they wouldn't be able to inflate things in a way where they can pay for these wars. We would have a much safer and much healthier world. Ron Paul said it, and I really strongly believe it. It coincides. It's not a happenstance that the 20th century was also the century where we had the most warfare, was also the century of fiat currency.
And these entrenched, very powerful, like, for example, you brought up the military industrial complex, which benefits tremendously. And I'm going to use your word. And Lawrence, I've been using this word because it's stuck with me, right? You said they do not want to give up this privilege, right? So the
Correct.
military industrial complex, they're completely not incentivized to give that up, right? That is
Correct.
how you fund the endless wars without direct taxation, because with direct taxation, I firmly believe you'd have a revolution in the streets the next day
That's
if
correct.
people really understood how much they're paying for this thing indirectly.
That's correct. Yeah. I mean, people want to, people say inflation is hurting me, and inflation is a function of the fact that we shipped, billions of dollars to Halliburton so that, basically, Dick Cheney could become a multi-billion or multimillionaire. So, yeah, I got to tell you, I got to get rid of this thread because it's just pissing me off so much. These, I'm not going to, I mean, if people don't understand, if people don't understand the geopolitics of the situation going on right now, they're thinking in fiat terms. Anyone who thinks in Bitcoin terms totally gets the fact that this is all just bullshit, and that these guys are going to start and propagate wars in order to cover up the fiscal and financial, catastrophe that they've created, right? And that's that's what I see going on. And it's sad because now we actually have nuclear weapons. So, there's the possibility of lots and lots of people dying in this fourth turning if somebody makes a mistake. And to me, that's crazy and sad. I mean, we should basically be negotiating. I would have liked to have thought that nuclear weapons would have been the ultimate thing that would cause everybody to realize that we have to find a non-lethal way of resolving human conflict. And sadly, I don't see that. So,
Yeah. So, Lawrence, do you believe, right? So, this is a fiat standard. This is what it leads to. Would it be safe to say that this war in Ukraine is a another potentially a distraction towards what is actually going on? So that's the first question. Number
yeah,
two, and of course, there's no way to know that it's speculation, but number two is, do you have faith in people's ability to wake up to this? Because if a lot, if you're paying attention, you understand what's going on. But in my experience, what I've noticed is a lot of people just don't care about sound money. They are distracted with bread and circuses. They're content with what they have. They're content with UBI. They're content with whatever it is. They don't care. What's the famous line, right? Giving up liberty for a little bit of security. And I've seen that specifically over the last couple of years during the pandemic. And to me, it worries me tremendously because the peaceful revolution, Bitcoin specifically, it does need an element of personal responsibility. People do need to take personal responsibility in order to adopt something like Bitcoin. So is that
yeah,
something that keeps you up at night?
yeah, it is, and it does. And I mean, look, there are always going to be those who would, sell their liberty for a little bit of security. And as Franklin said, they deserve neither. And then there are those of us who are going to basically say, we're going to fight this battle because it's a battle that needs to be fought, and we're going to win because it's obvious that we're right and it's compelling. And I think we've got absolutely everything on our side. And in spite, ultimately, at the margin, the fact that some people will never get it doesn't really matter. What needs to happen is a very strong and determined quorum, and that doesn't even have to be 50%, needs to push the issue and push it in the right way. I mean, if you look at the American Revolution, I mean, there were a lot of loyalists. It wasn't like the whole country was saying, Britain, get out of here. It started off as less than 5%, and probably at its peak, maybe it was 20% or 30%. But and I think that's the same thing here. The other thing that's going to happen is, what's going to happen is when the fiat really collapses, then it's going to be like a wake up call upside the head, right? I mean, when, look, inflation's bad now, it's going to get worse, right? It's going to get much worse. And as it gets much worse, people are going to start to say, hey, what the fuck? I mean, I can't live. I'm really getting, and people are going to start screaming about it. And, perhaps at some point it's going to accelerate, to the point where it becomes, Argentinian style, 15, 20% a year. And then after that, the next step after that is complete currency collapse. And I think both of those are very realistic probabilities in the system as it's now constructed. And so as a result of that, if and when those things occur, people they're going to open their eyes. They're going to, they're not going to, you can't ignore that, right? And it's going to be terribly sad because a lot of people are going to be very badly hurt by that. I'm not rooting for that. I'm just saying that's the likely event given the system as it's currently constructed. Those are the most likely events in my view. The timing of them is certainly, unpredictable how quickly it happens because it's a crowd sort of thing. I mean, right now, I will say this though, with every wave of inflation, with every move they make, more people are aware of the issue, right? I mean, some became aware in 2008 and thought that was it right then and there. Then some followed on, later, and some, became aware in 2020. And so, more and more people become aware with each move on their part. I think the next move on the part of the Fed is that they're going to have to, resume a money printing operation of some type because the alternative is worse, which would be a financial collapse. And I think when that happens, the percentage of the population that says, "Wow, they can never stop," that percentage is going to get larger. And if you study all the hyperinflations that there have been in history, and I've taken the time to do that as a financial analyst, what you see is that when a majority of the people come to conclude that, oh my God, this can never stop. These people are going to continue to print money from now until forever. Then this is Gresham's law. Then what happens is they naturally say to themselves, all right, yeah, that is true. I need to get rid of this shit called cash. And so I need to buy stuff. And, stuff includes Bitcoin and gold and houses and cars. Anything that you can't print. And, and then as that accelerates, it gets, larger and faster and goes quicker. And you have what, we call in Austrian economics, as a crack up boom, because everybody's literally just trying to get rid of the currency that they know can't hold its value. And so that's always the risk. And that, I think that event is coming, but I don't know with certainty the timing. Nobody does. But I think it's this decade, and I think it's probably in the first half of this decade. I used to think it was in 2021 when everything was melting up. I thought, oh, here we go. This is it. And then, amazingly, they, by slamming on the brakes and doing everything they've done, they've managed to kind of calm it down for a while. And so, all right, maybe, and at 2021, I was thinking, all right, by 24, 25, this is all going to be over. Somebody asked me on Twitter the other day, do you still believe in that? And I said, well, possibly, but it might be a year or two longer than that. But it doesn't matter. Each wave shows you, where we're going. I've been in gold since it was at $200 an ounce. And, I remember fighting to get through 800. I remember fighting to get through 1,000. I remember fighting to get through 1,300. It's 1,800, 1,900 today. We're going to go through 2,000, and it's going to be on its way to 2,500. And then at 2,500, 3,000 will be in view. And, it's inevitable, right? The way I see it, it's inevitable in the way the system is constructed because, the money printer has to run, or else the debt can't get serviced and the economy collapses. And so if you look at what governments do, governments just try to bribe people to stay in power, really is kind of the simplest way of looking at it. And, so they look at what the people are screaming about the loudest and they try to address it, right? So everyone's screaming about inflation. All right, Powell, tighten things up, try and get this inflation under control. Fine. He's doing that. And surprisingly, it's kind of working. Not that inflation's getting under control, but the hard money assets haven't done particularly well because of the actions he's taken, right? But, that will change. That narrative will change. And either inflation will come down or it won't. But eventually the economy is going to start to hurt because, 5%, 6%, 7% interest rates, there's going to be a day of reckoning here. And we're highly leveraged. It's a fragile system. Something's going to break. And when that happens, the issue is going to be, oh my God, the economy is blowing up. Forget about inflation for a minute. Turn the printer back on, or else the whole thing's going to collapse, right? And at that point in time, that's when that psychological shift will take place. Again, I don't know to what extent. I don't know if the next run up will be the final one that'll send us into hyperinflation. Probably not. I mean, we probably go to $100,000, $150,000 Bitcoin and $3,000 gold, and then they do some more money. They do some more tricks. They raise interest rates. They talk. I don't know. They put on wage and price controls. Who knows what they'll do? They'll do something to mess it up, and we'll have a correction. But each correction is to a higher level, right? And so, the inflation continues to build. I mean, we're not, we've got gasoline prices between 3 and 5, kind of depending where you are and what level of gas you buy. I mean, we're not going back to $1.50. We're not going back to 2. We're not going back to 3. I mean, I was on a podcast the other day. I mean, I remember very clearly being a kid, and gas was 26 cents a gallon. It was great. I mean, we're not going there again, right? I mean, they just keep debasing the currency. It's what Foss says. They can't stop. So,
what message would you have for my generation? What would you tell us? Because it was we were talking about this many months ago. We were talking about the fourth turning theory and how every generation has a different role to play. I believe that you said the millennial generation is the savior generation. Please correct me if I phrase that if I phrase that wrong. So, what message would you have for us? What responsibility has been bestowed to us based on this irresponsible, monetary policy, fiscal, whatever you want to call it? What would you say to us? What would you say? What do we need to do to fix things, to make things better?
Yeah, so you guys are the hero generation in fourth turning, terminology, which is to say that the system's about to blow up, and people are going to have to step up and fix it, and that's going to be your generation. So I think the important things for your generation to do are to, I mean, and one of the things that's great about your generation is you really like to work in teams. You're not as individualistic and as greedy as my generation was. We were all very individualistic. We were also all very greedy. You guys are actually concerned with the common good. I mean, I see that in my kids. I see that in you. I see it in everybody who's young and into the Bitcoin area. And I think it's great. And so my sense is that what you guys need to do is recognize that this isn't the way this country always was. Recognize what's broken, which is the monetary and political systems, and fight like hell to get it fixed. And it's not about blue and red. It's about orange and not orange. And it's about, and to the extent that it melds into the political area, then, we can get into a little bit of, term limits and the Constitutional Convention and, a lot of the things that would, getting the money out of politics and some of the things that would maybe restore America to, something closer to what the founding fathers had in mind when they drafted the Constitution. Because, we've gone a long way from that. I mean, you get into Congress or the Senate and, you're guaranteed to become a millionaire because it's corrupt as can be. And, you could solve that with term limits. You could solve that by taking money out of politics and publicly funding elections, letting people just have to get signatures and then they get a certain amount of money and that's all they get. There are ways to solve that. You could solve that by not letting people who serve in government then go back into the industries they're supposed to be regulating, the way they do in the defense and the banking industries, all those things. And so, what I would like to see would be, a group of the youth of this country coming together and trying to form a third party that said, that's the Reform Party that really very, very clearly picks apart all of the mistakes that have occurred as a result of the boomers and the misdirection that's taken place post World War II. I mean, look, we had a really great thing going in post World War II. I mean, the 50s, we were on top of the world, and we just pissed it away through stupidity and corruption and there was a lot of stuff that's great and still is great about this country, but we also let we let a certain class of people get control of the political mechanism, and it's made it just brutal for the average American. I mean, look at what happened to the Midwest. I mean, Ross Perot was right. I mean, NAFTA and letting China into the WTO, it sucked all those high-paying jobs out of the Midwest, and sent them to China. We didn't have any reciprocal trade agreement with them. I mean, we couldn't sell shit into China, and yet we let them just take all our jobs. The military-industrial complex got a hold of that whole thing, and we managed to create kind of continual wars. I mean, why don't we have nuclear power? Well, because the oil and gas industries and all the industries that make so much money off the power that we do have basically been able to corrupt the political system and make nuclear, kind of a non-starter. And yet, we should have, serious nuclear power if we want to. I mean, why is our infrastructure the way it is, right? I mean, all of these things are a function of a broken system. Having said that, the monetary collapse that I believe is coming is going to really be a fourth turning. It's going to wipe this slate clean, and it's going to be a lot better on the other side because you guys are smart enough to fix it. If the youngest generation, guided by the older, the gray generation like myself, will advise you and you'll do the work, right? And you guys are going to fix this thing. You're going to stand up and fix it and say, it's bullshit. The system is totally broken. It's totally bullshit. We can't buy houses. We don't have a fair system in any way, shape, or form. And you'll be the biggest voting bloc in 10, 15, 20 years, and my generation will be gone. So, that's why I consider you guys to be the hero generation. I mean, look at you. I look at Marty Bent. I look at Jack Mallers. I see perfect examples of this all over the place. Guys who are standing up and saying, no, this is wrong. The way it's set up is wrong. So how, in terms of what you can do day to day, I think you just spread the word amongst your friends, right? So, you orange pill as many people as possible. You try to get them to get out of the matrix, and look at how broken it is, right?
Yeah. And it's hand to hand. It's hand to hand. It's really about winning over the hearts and minds, one person at a time, and it's incredibly difficult. And you're dealing with a well entrenched media machine that is, I would say, their power is fading because more people are getting their information via independent media sources, whether it's a podcast or whether it's Twitter.
Right.
I love Twitter, right?
Yeah.
But it's almost as if you had this media cartel that was very, very successful at controlling narratives. I remember seeing this this tweet, and it resonated with me. And it said something like, if social media existed in 2003, we would have not have gone to war with Iraq. And I saw that, and I thought it was very, very fascinating.
Yeah, I hope that's true. I was around in 2003, and I remember all that. I mean, yeah, no, look, I mean, the fact, I mean, decentralization. I mean, we reached peak centralization in World War II. I mean, we kind of, and I've talked about this before. I mean, centralization in the beginning was a good thing. I mean, in my view, it really kind of started with Henry Ford. I mean, the assembly line, I mean, brought enormous wealth to the middle class, right? I mean, we figured out how to make things cheaper, quicker, and it was as a result of a centralized system, and that was good. But we ran that, and World War II was peak centralization in terms of killing people, and we figured out how to kill 50 million people really quickly with gas chambers and some very nasty weapons, including nuclear ones. And I think what we're learning, or what we should be learning, is that centralization has downside, and that decentralization is actually a good thing, at a political level, at a food level, at a money level, all of it. Because the problem with a centralized system is if you get a nut at the top, and we've had a few of those here, and Germany had one in the 40s. I mean, and arguably other countries have them as well. They can do a lot of damage, right? And so humankind, I think, is going to have to evolve into a much more decentralized systems with a lot more checks and balances. I mean, I imagine that our grandkids or maybe our great grandkids will say, can you believe they let anybody have nuclear weapons? I mean, those have been banned for so long that nobody would ever consider building one because they know that if they did, they'd face the death penalty, sort of thing. I mean, that there's a lot of insanity that has pervaded, human thought. I mean, this whole tribal country against country, people against people, it's bullshit. It's total bullshit. We're all the same.
Yes.
And nobody really wants to die, I don't think. So most people just want to live their lives in peace and try to add value and raise their family and love one another and so on and so forth. So, but it doesn't always work out that way because political people are sociopaths. A lot of political people are sociopaths, right?
Yeah. A lot of political people are sociopaths, and you said something in the beginning of the pod that really stuck with me. And as long as they have the money printer, it basically gives them the ability to buy votes, right? In a way, right?
Oh, that's right.
Because, yeah,
That's absolutely right. Yeah, that's how it all works, right? I mean, you can see where they're going with it. They'll do CBDCs, they'll do universal basic income, maybe even social scores, so on and so forth. I mean, look, I mean, there's a real, the other divide, forget blue red, I mean, it was orange and fiat. Another divide is just kind of statist, libertarian. And there's a big part of this country that is statist. I mean, they actually think that government is a good thing. Right. And, I think there might have been a time when the government was limited when it was a pretty good thing. I mean, the federal government, in the very early days was pretty damn small and didn't do much. But that has slowly but surely evolved in the other direction, and it's problematic. I mean, my view on government, for what it's worth, is just that they ought to be a fair referee. I mean, the government ought to enforce the laws, have the courts, punish criminals, and that's it. All the other stuff can be done, in the market, right? Really.
yeah, and I feel, especially since becoming a Bitcoiner, that belief system has just become bigger and bigger. Smaller government, let people figure it out. Let people take the personal responsibility over their lives. Do you believe that Bitcoin could potentially bring back the United? Because I'm an immigrant, so, and I think that a lot of people, specifically in this country, don't understand how privileged they are in a way. Not only because the U.S. is isolated on two coasts, right? So it makes it relatively peaceful, but also being in the country that is the world reserve currency, right? Being
Right.
able to print all the money in the world, and all the privilege and all the wealth and all the power really that comes with that. And I think that's lost in people. And then, Lawrence, I kind of go through, if you look at history, we think this time's different, but this has happened many, many times. I feel like the cycle is repeating itself in a way, and we are on the verge of this, of, you said it earlier, this crack up boom. Um, so are we repeating history? Is Are we seeing something that has happened
Yeah,
throughout?
it's obviously it's never exactly the same, but the pattern is similar. I mean, this kind of a sovereign debt crisis occurred, and this kind of a problem occurred in the early 1900s. I mean, World War II, and then World War II really kind of or World War One, and World War One kind of continued into World War II. I mean, we've seen this pattern before, and you had a lot of sovereign currency crises then. I mean, the pound was devalued a couple of times. Germany had hyperinflation. Russia did too. We had a depression because we tried to stay on a sound money standard, even though we devalued gold substantially. And yes, this is a pattern that has repeated itself. And empires don't last forever, right? I mean, Dalio's book, you can read on it, talks about this, how the reserve currency tends to turn over, over time. I mean, prior to us, it was Britain. Prior to Britain, it was, I guess it was the Dutch and the Spanish at one point in time, and I mean, way back when it was the Roman currency, and empires generally die the same way that this one is dying, which is, they get fat and lazy and they coast on their reputation, and they spend too much, and they don't, I mean, the politicians, have spent way too much money, and as a result, they start debasing the money, and that debasement trend continues, and then, eventually the debasement trend becomes a waterfall, and once the currency is no good, then you're nothing. I mean, the United States has lived well beyond its means for a lot of years based on the fact that we were the leading country post World War II, and we established the petrodollar and so on and so forth. I mean, and all of those things. I mean, it's not like we're going to fail tomorrow, but the trends on all of those things are going in the wrong direction for the United States, and it's sad. I hate to see how poorly managed this country has been. I mean, it's been very poorly managed, in my opinion, but it is what it is. And I think that like all cycles, it will adjust. And I don't think it's curtains for the U.S. I just think we're going to have a much more multipolar world, and we're going to return around the world to sound currencies, and that'll be a really good thing. I mean, the Brighton. I mean, I'm talking about a lot of depressing stuff, right? I mean, fourth turnings are ugly and nasty, and things get broke. Things get broken. But on the other side of that, getting broken, things will get fixed. And fourth turnings don't last forever. And once you come out of one, it can be quite good. And if we had sound money, the world would be a much better place. I'm absolutely certain of that. And so, and if we had great political leadership, we could have sound money tomorrow. I mean, we could, have a reset and a conversion to it. And I mean, it would be painful, but it could be done. Sadly, though, I don't think there's the political will, or the way the system is set up. I don't think anybody's going to go there unless they're forced to go there. And so what I think is going to happen is that the system is going to break down, and then that's going to cause everyone to realize that the money was the problem, and then sound money will be adopted, and our kids and grandkids will have much better lives living under a sound money standard. And they'll sit around and say, I can't believe these guys allowed 10 people sitting in Washington, D.C. to set the interest rate. I mean, what the hell were they thinking? I mean, it's ridiculous. So
100%. And 100%. And but I'm afraid that, but I don't know why I'll be afraid, but basically, yes, our grandkids, my generation, will never forget, right? Like the greatest generation didn't forget the lessons of World War II. And then
Right.
as time progressed, the lessons of the past were forgotten. And then, you have this cycle. And then my hope, Lawrence, is that Bitcoin breaks the cycle. Bitcoin ends it, because gold, in a way, and I'm going to pull up this tweet that I thought was really fascinating, and you were tagged. It's by Matt Foley. It says, "It seems that every time a gold standard was implemented in the past, ancient Greece, Roman Empire, USA, it worked for a while, then eventually failed. So why would this time be any different?" And then you respond to that, but I'd rather ask you, if we do pull this off, right? If we do, and I think we will, I think Bitcoin's incentives will win the day. How would Bitcoin be different in gold? How would Bitcoin resist what happened to gold?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a couple of things. I mean, one, it's naturally deflationary, whereas gold is not. I mean, the supply of gold in the world is growing at about 2% a year, and in 50 years we'll have twice as much gold in the world. And gold has an alternative usage, which is there are a very small number of industrial uses, but there also is the jewelry usage. Bitcoin is pure money based on energy. And it's really the only form of pure money. And the amazing thing about Bitcoin that's so unique and the other thing is the price of gold responds, or the supply of gold responds to the price. It's a commodity. And, I can assure you that if the price of gold were to triple tomorrow, we'd mine more gold, right? I mean, the supply would increase. No matter what happens to the price of Bitcoin, the supply ain't increasing. That's it. We're done. So that's the biggest difference, that Bitcoin is deflationary. And we should live, as Jeff Booth has pointed out, we live in a deflationary world. We should live in a deflationary world because technology is always improving productivity. And the reason why the average man has been hurt so bad is that productivity has been stolen through the inflation that allows people who can game the system to get all the wealth. But back to, Bitcoin and gold and the gold standard, and them both being sound money. So if we went to a gold standard, it would be better than what we're on right now, but it wouldn't be as good as a Bitcoin standard. And in part, that's because nobody really knows how much gold there is. Nobody knows where it is. It's hard to move around. It's hard to audit. It's hard to prove. There's fake gold in the sense that people have taken tungsten and coated it, which is close to the same atomic weight, and coated it with gold. I mean, it's difficult to verify, et cetera. I mean, Bitcoin is very, very easy to verify. It's on a ledger. You can see it. You can prove that you've got it by moving a small piece of it, et cetera, et cetera. The negative on both of them, and I said it in that tweet, and you pull it up again because I think it's important. I look at my look at my response. Bitcoin does face some of the same paper problems we have. So let's talk about derivatives for a moment. I mean, part of the reason why the price of gold is where the price of gold is because there's a lot of paper gold. And if we actually did the math the way it was done in the 70s, when we were on a gold standard or semi-gold standard, at least at the international level, if you took the money supply figure today and divided it by the gold that the U.S. holds, gold should be at $80,000 an ounce. It's not. It's at 18,000 or 1,800 an ounce right now. It shows you how much money we've created. And the reason for that difference is that we created a lot of paper gold. Robert Rubin, Larry Summers, Barsky, they did a paper called Gibson's Paradox. And, when Clinton was president, I recall very clearly, James Carville saying, I want to come back because the bond markets have all the power. And what these guys figured out was gold is the alarm bell that tells you you're inflating the money supply. And so they figured out if we can sell paper gold, we can keep the price of gold down and everyone will think there's no inflation, when in reality there is, and the economy will look great and I'll get reelected. And that's what Clinton thought. And so that was really, in my view, the beginning of the serious gold suppression through the sale of paper gold. And I think they do it off the balance sheet. I'm pretty sure they do it through the Exchange Stabilization Fund and a few other things that we can't see and we'll never be allowed to audit. But they've intentionally held the price of gold down to keep the fiat game going. And there's nothing to, and so when you get into a financial game and everyone's playing and betting on the price of something, if you are the biggest player, it's like being in a poker game. If you're the biggest player with the most money and you can put all your money on the table on a bet and nobody can call your bluff, you win by default, right? And so in a sense, in some financial games, the people with the biggest balance sheet have got the game rigged where they can win. I mean, as an example, look at the Hunt brothers. They were able to take the price of silver up to 50. They had the silver market cornered. They could have ruined basically everybody who was a supplier. They could have ruined the silver market. And what did the exchange do? They changed the rules. They changed it to liquidation only. And basically said, sorry, Hunts, we're not going to let you win. And that's kind of what these guys do, the guys who run the government. And so Bitcoin is a form of sound money. But who's to say that somebody couldn't get into a paper contract and say, well, look at FTX as an example. They carried a bunch of Bitcoin in theory on their balance sheet. People gave them money and said, buy Bitcoin for me, right? They thought if they looked at their account statement, they owned Bitcoin. But the fact of the matter is they didn't own any Bitcoin because FTX never went and bought it. So they owned paper Bitcoin. They had a claim on Bitcoin against FTX, but FTX hadn't actually bought the coins. And so as a result of that kind of a paper derivative, and there are paper derivatives, there's a futures market for Bitcoin, and there are a lot of private market derivatives as well. And Glassnode has laid this out, and Caitlin Long has done a very good job of looking at it as well. And so the fact of the matter is we not only have to move to a Bitcoin standard, but we also have to, at a legal level, ban derivatives. Because derivatives are a tool for financial people to manipulate markets, to steal wealth from other people. Full stop. I mean, that's all they are. The only way it started as, a futures contract was for a farmer who was producing corn and General Mills who was trying to make cereal to say, all right, I want to sell my corn to you and you want to buy it at a fixed price and we'll figure it out. And that was a legitimate business contract. I'm producing something, you're buying something, we're agreeing on a contract. But then what happens is, what if, the U.S. government's never gotten into the corn market, not that I'm aware of. What happens if the U.S. government decide, well, I'm going to get into the corn market and start playing around with, buying and selling corn, and I can manipulate the price because I'm the biggest player on the block. And that's what's going on with gold. And that could go on with Bitcoin. It hasn't happened yet because you can see the amount of derivatives outstanding, but it's trending in the direction where they're getting more involved in it. And so, to your generation, I would say, when we get Bitcoiners in government, when the system has collapsed and we're going to a Bitcoin standard, and we get Bitcoiners in government, and the new rules get written just as the rules were written post the 1929 collapse. We have the new SEC. I think one of the rules that has to be written is that derivatives will be banned. That the only derivatives allowed will be for legitimate commercial purposes. If you're a farmer selling corn or you're a cereal manufacturer buying corn, you guys can do a derivative contract, or oil, whatever, anything. But there's got to be actual physical behind what you're buying and selling. You can't have just financial contracts on top of, there has to be a commercial, interest in it, not just a financial interest in it. Because if it's all financial interest games, the government, the biggest balance sheet wins, and the U.S. government has the biggest balance sheet right now. And so they can manipulate it in their favor and against those of us who believe in sound money. And they've done that with gold. And I think people who believe that just because all the Bitcoin is on a chain, it can't happen with Bitcoin, they're being naive. Because, who's to prevent Party A from doing a deal with Party B on Bitcoin at a fixed price? And whether they have the coins or not doesn't matter. That price somehow gets into the marketplace. I mean, if off the marketplace, Nico, I sell you one coin for $20,000. You send me $20,000, and I say I owe you a Bitcoin, right? That's $20,000 that did not go into the system to push the price of Bitcoin up. That was a private deal. And let's say I don't have the coin, right? I'm just taking a financial bet against you. You're saying you want it to go up, and I'm saying I'll pay you if it does go up. And but that didn't move the price in any way, shape, or form. So your demand did not get reflected in the supply-demand balance. And that's the danger of paper. And it's a big thing, and it could become an issue. So again, to your generation, when we get to the point of writing the laws to fix all this shit, we got to ban derivatives.
Yeah. And that was one of Caitlin Long's main concerns, right? She calls it the rehypothecation, and she keeps doubling down on how dangerous this is. And obviously she's someone to pay attention to. She comes from the belly of the beast, so to speak.
She worked at
She
Morgan
lived
Stanley
in that world.
25
Exactly.
years. Yeah. Harvard Law School grad. She's smart as a whip. And, you've noticed that, they've gone after her recently because they're trying to close the barn door after the horse escaped. FTX, Gary Gensler should resign in disgrace. It's just absolutely ridiculous the way that they allowed, everybody to get, taken advantage of by all these crypto schemes that so many smart people, including the leader of Swan, Corey, who just did a fantastic job of documenting. There's so many of us. I remember being in Madeira talking with a bunch of the Bitcoiners. We're all like, we just know Sam Bankman-Fried is a fraud. We know he's going to get wrecked. It's just a matter of time. We all could see it and knew it. And even Caitlin said she was sending things to regulators that she knew and heard and saying, look, this is not right. I can tell you there's bad stuff going on here. And nobody was paying attention, right? And so, here we are, right?
Here we are after, all the, and again, I feel bad for the people that put faith in a con man who was not only able to manipulate, people. I don't want to name any specific people, but let's say very predominant celebrities that have major followings, but he was also able to fool completely, the head of the SEC, who, if you read the New York Magazine article where he admitted, at least there's a positive to this, at least there's a silver lining, where he admitted that Bitcoin is, in his eyes, is different than the rest. But in that article, it was stated many times that Gary Gensler had one-on-one meetings with Sam Bankman-Fried.
Wow, I didn't read that article. If that's the case and he couldn't smell the fraud there, like I say, he should resign in disgrace. If I were a senator or a congressman, I would have gone berserk. This is the guy who's in charge of protecting investors. And there were, I know of people who had hundreds of thousands of dollars at FTX that just got vaporized. And, that's wrong and that's sad. And, even now he's saying all these cryptocurrencies are unregulated securities. Okay, fine. What are you going to do about it? Right? So you're going to, what, sir, what are you going to do about it? Because that is your job. Why aren't you bringing cases against them? Why aren't you suing them and making them, provide more disclosure? why aren't you making them register as if they were securities, right?
Yeah,
So, right?
100%. So Lawrence, I want to use the end part of the podcast because we were talking about which, in my opinion, and I really believe this in my heart. I think it's important to talk about the tough subjects. You have to be real. You have to live in the present. That's the way that I approach it. But I want to end it on a positive light, right?
Good.
After we get over this hump, right?
Yeah.
This inevitable hump that I know that you feel it as well. You're anticipating it. What is the world going? What are you most looking forward to in a world on a Bitcoin standard? How would that world differ from today's world, and why would it differ in the first place?
Well, I think it will be incredibly positive and optimistic. I mean, that's the biggest, the biggest difference from today. I think a lot of people today are, very depressed about the economic conditions they're facing, and I mean, you look at, I mean, the opioid problem and so many things that are a reflection of that. Um, I'd be glad to never have to listen to another central banker, lying to me again. uh, and I think it'd be a time where I think people could really feel good about the future. And it's interesting. I mean, I was born in '57 and I grew up in Detroit, in the Detroit area, and there was a real positivity when I was growing up. We were putting the whole country on wheels, and even though the Vietnam War was a very big negative, there was a lot of money flowing around. It was a very positive time. I mean, we had won World War II, and we're still the greatest country in the world, of course. And they murdered the president in '63. But in general, it was just a very positive place and a positive time, and things were good. And you looked forward to the future, and you thought things were going to be better. It's interesting. I've been to China a bunch of times. I'm not saying they're a good, representative of political leadership, but I will say this: the first time I was there in the mid 2000s, I remember like 2005. I remember very clearly the optimism and the positivity of the people. And the reason for that was because, and I got to know some of the local people. And the reason for that was because their lives were really getting better. I mean, they had great grandparents who would, almost starve to death under Mao. And, they had an apartment, and they had a motorbike, and they had a job, and they could eat decent food. And I mean, there was just an amazing positivity of it all. Like, life is good and getting better, and I think that's the way life is meant to be. I mean, we're all out there, working hard to make things better, and life should get better. I mean, each generation should live better than the prior generation. And given the technology, as Jeff Booth talks about, I mean, I think some of the things we're going to see, and some of the events, and the quality of our lives, I think we're going to be stunned, in the next, what occurs in the next 10, 20, 50 years, just because of how rapidly things are changing. So there's a lot to be very, very positive about, but we've got to shed this broken system, before we can fully enjoy that, in my opinion.
Yes,
And
and
and we're shedding it now, but it's messy, right? So
yeah, to say the least, it is, and it's a battle. It's a battle,
it is a
but
battle, yeah. Because
there's no other.
the people on the other side, the people who have the privilege, they don't want to give it up,
Mhm.
and that's why you see the mongers, pushing back, and that's why you got. I mean, there are a lot of people throwing sand in our face, and that's because they benefit enormously from the system as it is now constructed. It has served them incredibly well, and they think they're geniuses. And they're not. They got in front of the right wave at the right time, and they're not geniuses, and I think that's gonna be one of the pleasing things for me to see, is some of these people, getting a better understanding of they were in the right place at the right time, as opposed to being as smart as they think they are.
Are we going to win,
Oh,
Lawrence?
there's no doubt we're going to win. Yeah, Marty Bent said it first. He's right. Yeah, we're going to win. There's no way. Hey, look, it's an idea whose time has come. I mean, it's the thing. Even at today's price, I mean, this is the best performing financial asset in the history of the world ever. On a return basis, on a Sharpe ratio basis, on any way you want to measure it, it's the most asymmetric bet ever. And Foss and I pound the table on this. I mean, If you don't have some piece of your net worth in Bitcoin, you're nuts. And I don't care if it's only 1%. The only wrong answer is zero, because this thing's going up 100 times, 1,000 times where it is today. Yeah, somebody put up the tip of the spear. Absolutely. Bitcoin is the tip of the spear. We are going to charge up this hill, and we're going to kill all these fiat masters. I mean, I mean, there's just no doubt. I mean, there's just absolutely no doubt it's going to happen. And that's what's kind of fun about it all. I mean, in spite of the, the ups and downs and the bull and bear markets, all the other crap and all the noise they throw in our face is, if you really step back a moment, I mean, we are winning. Nico,
Yeah.
I mean, I was around in 2013, 2016, 2017. I mean, there were a lot of other times when I was more concerned about whether we're going to win. I mean, now it's like, now the ball is definitely rolling. So yeah, we're going to win, no doubt.
I love that. Bitcoin is the metaphorical tip of the spear
Oh yeah.
to slay the beast. I love that. I love that. Anyways, Lawrence, I don't want to take more of your time. It's always